Welcome to the top 12 highlights of Chapter 7, Chapter 4 and 8 in the textbook, as we look at public opinion, ideology, participation, and voting. Thanks for joining me for these top 12 highlights. Let's take a closer look. First, let's start with American political culture. We know political culture are the widely shared values that we hold. We value freedom. We value equality. We value liberty. The idea of equality of opportunity, the big picture, big ticket items, those are the things that we value. We share as a society. Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, Socialists, we can all agree we value freedom. How we go about legislating it is where we get into ideological differences. But the political culture is the values that we hold dear, and that's what we see here, those core values. Now, how do we come about those values? They're shared through socialization, the idea of our family, our schools, our professors and colleges and universities, our friends, our religious institutions, and even the media are shaping us in terms of how we are socialized and what we are exposed to and able to parse that information into critical thinking in terms of why we believe what we believe and why that is so, what evidence we can base that on. That leads us into the ideologies that we have looked at in this chapter. The idea of a liberal ideology is one that is socially liberal. A pure liberal is socially liberal in that they want government out of the way in terms of any legislating of moral values. So when it comes to abortion, women should have the right to choose. When it comes to same-sex marriage, it should be allowed. When it comes to prayer in schools, there's a wall of separation. That's what liberals believe in that respect. They also favor less defense spending, more economic involvement of the government in terms of leveling the playing field and providing some safety nets for individuals that are down on their luck, that maybe lost their job. There are welfare benefits. There's food stamps. There's unemployment checks and opportunities. They value this type of spending in the economy when it comes to economics. And people should be taxed that have jobs in order to help level that playing field so that everybody has equality of opportunity in terms of addressing that. Opposing vouchers and really focusing on funding for public schools and the importance of social liberty there. That's more the liberal ideology in terms of what we see here. The conservative ideology is looking at more defense spending, more government involvement when it comes to legislating moral issues, things like the right to life, anti-abortion focus, area of focus, the idea of favoring vouchers for religious schools in addition to funding of public schools, the idea of protecting traditional values, including the idea of marriage traditionally being between a man and a woman is a conservative ideology. The idea of less government in our lives from an economic point of view. So cut back the regulation, cut back the taxes on businesses, and allow them to use that money to hire other workers and to hire additional workers and to put the money back into the economy. And that is their economic focus, is to get government away from that regulation and that taxation and to have government more involved in the social aspects. So we see that from liberals and conservatives. Libertarian wants government out of both sides of that equation. They agree with liberals that they want government out of the social aspects. They agree with no legislation around limiting a woman's right to choose, but they also agree with getting government out of regulation around businesses. So they agree with conservatives on that point. So libertarians are really of the focus that they want government out of both sides, the social and the economic. Favoring privatization of education, more a conservative point of view. Favoring social liberty, more of a liberal point of view. And really adopting the idea of getting government out of the business of social and economic aspects altogether. Now, traditional conservatives are more the pro-business conservatives. They're the ones that want government out of the regulation. They want government out of the taxation of businesses so that business can solve its own problems, so that business can hire additional workers and not be regulated and bound by those regulations to keep business from growing. Social conservatives are more the moral conservatives. They're the ones that are focused on family values and the idea of of limiting access to abortion and trying to encourage people to be pro-life. Also, the idea of having laws against drugs and being against the legalization of those drugs, as well as against same-sex marriage and in many cases affirmative action programs. So these are more social conservatives in terms of what we see here, and that makes up the conservative side of the equation in terms of what we call this theory of rational choice. More and more people, as we see the parties continue to move into a more hyper-partisan direction to the left or to the right, we see more people are actually becoming more moderate. They're becoming more independent. They're throwing off the labels of parties. They're really looking at this and saying, I want to de-align with any party. I want to be free from that. I want to be an independent. I want to be a moderate. I want to swing to the left and help Democrats win when it's appropriate. And I want to swing to the right and help Republicans win when it's appropriate. I want to vote based on the candidate, not based on the party. And so we see the elections being targeted for these people in the middle. Why? Because that's where the people are. That's where elections are won and lost. You can appeal to your base and win 30, 35, even maybe 40% of the vote, but you're not going to win an election that way. You got to get 51% of the vote in order to win. And so you're going to have to appeal to those people in the middle. And both parties know this, and both ideologies know this. And so that appeal to the middle is really the fight on the middle ground that we see today. Now, these are shaped through political attitudes, this idea of an attentive public, people that are paying attention to what's going on in the news, people that are reading newspapers and talking about what's going on in the government and what's going on in politics today with their family, with their friends, with colleagues and whatnot. Those are the attentive public. That really is people that are very involved and very up to date on what's going on with current events, especially as it relates to politics and government. Then the alternative to that is we have the know-nothings, people who really have no interest, no knowledge, and really don't care. These are the apathetic voters. They probably don't vote, probably don't know where their polling place is if they're even registered to vote at all. They are very removed from politics in terms of what we see today. We also have the part-time citizen, those that vote in presidential elections, and that's really about all they do. They pay attention when the 4-year time frame rolls around, but otherwise they don't really take part in politics and what's going on. They're not really paying attention to the day-to-day. Now, activists are the alternative to that. Activists are very involved in what's going on. They are an attentive public, and they're even more so in that they're joining interest groups, political parties. They're joining groups and campaigns. They're helping out with campaigns. They're volunteering. They're donating money. They're raising money, doing all kinds of things to encourage people to get involved in politics as well. So these are the activists that we see, and very active in that role. Now, how do we know where to focus that action, that activity? It's based on public opinion, and we talked in this chapter about the importance of measuring that public opinion by looking at polls, by looking at surveys in terms of how people react to different questions that are posed to them. We also know the importance of asking the right questions and making sure that there's an accurate poll. It's got to be random and that everybody has an equal shot of being selected. It's also a good sample size, about 1,000 people. The questions are also very unbiased, and the wording is very simplistic and not anything that is too highly intelligent for someone that's being asked the question to understand, because they're going to react negatively or they're going to lie to you. So unbiased questions, wording that is very nonplussed. It is very straightforward, and is a question they could very easily answer without having to make them look stupid. And then it's a representative sample. The idea that about 1,000 people are representative of the entire country. You're going to have to look a little deeper on that, and maybe sometimes sample size is going to be larger because of the demographics that aren't necessarily represented by that first 1,000 people. So there is an adjustment there. And speaking of adjustments, that margin of error that we talked about is about plus or minus 3% for a really good poll. An accurate public opinion poll really is going to have a margin of error of plus or minus 3% or less. Minus 2% would be a really good poll in that it's very accurate and you can trust the data. Any 3% obviously would would be fair to that. You get 4 or 5%, then you start to question some of the sample size, the wording of the questions, the representative aspects of the sample. Then it's more of concern, and that calls into question the validity of the poll itself. So margin of error about plus or minus 3%. Now, those open-ended questions, very important because what we are looking for here are a couple of things. One, we're looking for intensity. How strongly do people feel about the topic? How can you measure how intense they are in answering these questions? The more intense they are, the stronger they feel about an issue, the more they're going to be likely to take action upon that issue. We hear about push polls all the time in which people are called and told about an issue, many times from a campaign in order to get them to take action, to get them upset about something so that they'll actually go out and take action based on how they feel, and donate to a campaign or volunteer for a campaign or do something to help with that effort. Now, latency is one of those issues in which it's harder to judge, it's harder to poll, because many times the opinions are out there, but they're not necessarily expressed. It's not something that we can just quickly pick up on, and that's of concern because latent issues or perspectives are really hard to gauge in polls. We can judge on that based on the lack of intensity, but it's also really hard to read between the lines in some cases in terms of how people are answering questions. And then the last one is salience, the idea of how important an issue is and how much it changes over time in terms of its prioritization. The issue of what is happening in the economy, how rapidly that's changing, and how rapidly the opinions on that topic are changing based on what's happening in the world. So that's really important and something for campaigns to and pollsters to take a look at, because it really tells us that, wow, this is an issue that there's a lot of volatility. There's a lot of change that's happening as a result of this issue. Now, voting is the number one political activity, and it's the most common that we see out there. Presidential elections, highest turnout in presidential elections, as we know, and that would be the most common form of political activity. But there are lots of ways that we can get involved in participating in public opinion and participation besides voting, things like joining interest groups or political parties, getting involved in campaigns or donating your time or your money in that regard. And so there's lots of ways that we can work on that. But voting is most important. If you don't vote, your voice is not heard. And we know that is so important. So Get Out the Vote is really the critical movement to really get people to the polls, get them out to vote, especially the base, but use every trick on the table, whether it's postcards or phone calls or buses or other types of transportation to get you to the polls, all to get you out to vote. And that is so important, because if people don't get to the polls to vote, it doesn't matter what else is happening and what else is being done. If they don't vote, everything else is for naught. Now, there are lots of reasons why people don't vote. Voter apathy is the idea that people will come up with any excuse, like I've got to stay home and wash the cat because I don't need to vote. Hashtag don't wash the cat. I've been telling students that for a long time. It became a hashtag there on Twitter for a while. Hashtag don't wash the cat. Vote. The idea is there are lots of reasons why we can stay home, but the most important reason is to go out and exercise your voice by voting. So there are a lot of reasons why people stay home, why people don't vote. There are lots going on. One is that we vote on a weekday. It's not a holiday. The voting hours are very limited, and they're different from state to state. Voter eligibility is different in terms of how you register to vote, whether you're still registered to vote, and how you can vote with early voting. That changes from state to state because states conduct elections, and so that varies from state to state because of that. So you have to pay attention to that. And most people, if they're not paying attention to that, they're not an attentive public, and they don't have a campaign that's telling them how to move forward and how to look at this. They just throw up their hands and they give up. And that's why the Get Out the Vote effort is so important when it comes to voter apathy, because you don't want people to stay home. You want to do whatever you can to get them out to vote. Now, how do they vote is a great question. Party ID is the number one factor. People vote based on party. Now, as I mentioned, more and more people are moving to the middle, so that de-alignment of party identification has been changing for about the last 40 or 50 years. We're seeing a lot more people in the middle today than we once did, and that means they're looking at other factors in terms of voting. The second one here is candidate appeal. Does this candidate have charisma, energy, dynamo? Do you really like how what they're saying? and what they want to do when they get elected to office. That's the candidate appeal. And that's the second most important factor in voting next to party ID, which is starting to lose favor. So we see candidate appeal is also that address. And then the third one is issues. The issues in terms of why people turn out to the polls. They're voting for a candidate based on issues that are important to them, showing the priorities and voting with their voice in terms of what issues are most important to them. And looking at those issues is really important because it brings to mind two different types of issues that we look at: prospective and retrospective. The idea of prospective voting is hope for the future, what you're going to do for us in the next 4 years. That was the campaign of President Obama, Senator Obama in 2008. It was very much forward looking. It was very much looking to the future in terms of what was going to happen in the years ahead. Retrospective voting is what we saw in the 1980 campaign, where Ronald Reagan said, "Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?" And people said, "Well, Jimmy Carter, what have you done for me lately?" And the answer was, "You've given me high unemployment, you've given me high inflation, we've got a hostage crisis, and long gas lines. And so what have you done for me lately?" "Well, I don't have a job. Bread and milk is costing more than ever, and I've got long gas lines, if I can even get gas at all, and hostages are in Tehran." People are voting for change, and that's exactly what they did. So that "what have you done for me lately," that retrospective issues is what people voted on in 1980 and said, we're ready for change. We see that we are not better off than we were 4 years ago, and we're going to do something about it. Now, most important is to remember that states conduct elections. We have no national elections. When we have a presidential election, we have 51 state elections, 50 states and the District of Columbia, 23rd Amendment, that run elections. So they determine voter eligibility, they determine precinct locations, they determine the types of equipment that's used, the voting machines, and how those are tallied. And we know there is no perfect system in terms of what is out there. But states conduct elections. There is no national election. There are just state elections for national office. And so that's what we see time and again. I hope you found this helpful in terms of the top 12 highlights. Good luck on the upcoming assessment, and we'll see you in the next chapter.